From the old days of putting a bag of tea over your eyes when they're puffy to the new days of a coffee mask at Lush. Feels like people are putting caffeine in like all sorts of cosmetics and hair products now. But this is something that's been going on for a while. So how well does caffeine actually work to do everything it says it is going to do? It promotes hair growth. It helps you with your sunscreen. It can reduce the likelihood of cancer and also fix the bags under your eyes. And also, by the way, fix your cellulite. But which of these things are actually backed up by science, and how good is the science they're backed up by? Today, I will go into the world of nutricosmetics, aka specifically us putting caffeine in everything and what is it actually doing. Before I begin on this deep dive, fully recognize that I'm not a dermatologist or an MD. I am a PhD neuroscientist who knows a lot about caffeine, but a very limited amount about things like skincare. Like, I only know how to pronounce hyaluronic acid because of a commercial. We'll start with its primary effect that a lot of people talk about, and that's the vasoconstricting effect. So that ability to actually constrict your blood vessels, that's supposed to help with all sorts of things, from like under eye darkness to like puffy eyes, even to things like wrinkles. So theoretically, all of these things kind of make sense. And as like reading one of those like cosmetic things, it's like, oh yes, it has this hyaluronic acid and that's an antioxidant, so that's going to work. And you're like, okay, but why does that work? That is the basic theory. So it's a vasoconstrictor, and so it's actually going to kind of like tighten the skin and reduce the puffiness and things like that. The science here says it might work depending on how you use it, but this is the beginning of the rest of this video about the sketchy science in this type of research. Now, on their face, some of these don't seem like terrible studies. So in this case, there was like a study that was looking at caffeine in a basically like gel pad. And so they had them put a caffeinated gel pad under one eye and a non-caffeinated gel pad under the other eye. And they looked to see like after about 3 weeks of this, did they have any difference? And they found that like, yeah, subjectively in that case, the side that you would put the caffeine version on, it did seem like the dark eye circles were actually better, and it did seem like they were less puffy. But here's the thing. It's pretty much never caffeine alone that they're studying in these studies. So in this case, it was caffeine plus vitamin K. And it's almost impossible to find a study that looks at caffeine alone. Like, they're all looking at these proprietary measures. So they're looking at like their specific blend of things, because that's what they're doing the research for, to show that their little new product is the thing that's going to actually reduce the eye circles for once and for all. Which, from a scientific perspective, these studies are basically all then flawed, because they are assuming that they're going to find a result, and they're going to be more likely to find a result. So that's why we do things like single blind and double blind, but that's rarely found in this type of research. By the way, single blind means that when you're actually giving the product that the person doesn't know what they're taking, and double blind means that even the researcher doesn't know what they're giving out. And you want the researcher not to know so that they can't like subtly bias those people like, oh yeah, and here's this one, and then here's this one. Not saying that scientists do that, but unconsciously we do a lot of things that we don't realize based on our own biases. So that was a more long-term study. They did also an acute study. So they're looking at like this one-time effect. And what they did here was they had like a cooling eye mask and a cooling eye mask plus caffeine. And what they found was that like, oh yeah, the caffeinated eye mask did seem to actually really work. But here's the thing. So did the cooling mask without caffeine. So it wasn't actually the fact that caffeine was in it. It was the fact that it was cooling that actually helped with the puffiness. So that whole idea of like just putting like a cold product or like cold washcloth or like an ice pack over your eyes to reduce the swelling, that is potentially just as good as your caffeinated products. Sketchy things from these studies as well as others. That second study that I was talking about with like the cooling eye mask in terms of how it looked at skin, they use pig skin a lot for that because it's very similar to human skin. And so a lot of these studies are actually not done on human skin, but on pigs' butts in particular. Now let's move on to cellulite, also known as like orange peel or like that dimpled skin that people get. And this is more commonly found in women, something fat storage and like tissue type. I don't know. Now the theory as to why caffeine will work on things like cellulite has to actually do with like dehydrating of fat cells as well as like microcirculation. It is not necessarily linked to the vasoconstrictor effect that I was talking about in the last one. But yeah, that's all theory, because a lot of the research here is just as sketch as the last research. So again, we were talking about like pig butts. In this case, they found that caffeine might have some effects on like cellulite on pig butts, but only with ultrasound too. So like caffeine by itself didn't do anything. Now, when they tested it for 21 days on rats and cellulite, don't ask me how they did that, they did find that there was an effect in rats, but when they tested this in humans, yeah, once again, it's not the caffeine, but the other things that go along with it that might be actually helping. So in this case, they had women massage caffeine onto their butt and thighs, and they found that like that massage plus caffeine worked really well to help with cellulite, but so did massage only. So cold only is working and massage only is working and maybe caffeine only is not. Once again, the science here is kind of sketchy. So one paper called it an adenosine agonist. It's not that, it's an antagonist. It works opposite of what they're saying. And then another study said that cellulite is a, quote, unacceptable cosmetic problem. Why is it unacceptable? As far as I know, cellulite is harmless. So why are we saying that something that just changes how you look is unacceptable? Now, what about skin cancer? Well, there is a link between the prevalence of drinking caffeine. So the more caffeine you drink, the less likely you are to get things like skin cancer. But as you can probably guess, that is correlational, not causal. We can't run those studies. But that didn't seem to be a problem to some of the scientists who were quoting this, who said that basically caffeine more than 6 cups a day caused a reduction in the prevalence of skin cancer. No, it didn't. And yes, they say that caffeine might work in like cells and mice, but those are in cells and mice. There's a running joke that like basically everyone who's done cancer research has cured cancer in mice at least once. It's not really that translatable to human conditions, and that's part of the problem. Now, what about helping with things like sunscreen? Actually, caffeine might work to help sunscreen do better. And there's studies in animals and in humans for this too. So like, good job with that one. So that might actually work. And we see similar happy, maybe positive ideas for things like hair loss. Now, it could do things like open up hair follicles, but I don't know how that works. But it seems like there might be some good studies here. There's also a lot of sketchy studies here too. One combined caffeine with adenosine, even though they do the exact opposite things. And then one said that caffeine worked, but only when you combined it with like a whole bunch of other ingredients. If you actually looked at the base of caffeine with like basically nothing else, yeah, it didn't work. So yeah, basically all of this science is sketchy and people are paying a lot for these products. And they do have side effects. Like they can increase things like redness and tingling. And we all know that too much caffeine seems to be a problem, but in these cases, it has very, very low doses. Which the last myth that I want to bust is that like taking caffeine in your eye cream is going to make you buzzed. No, that's not going to happen. They are very low doses, not enough to make you feel any sort of like systemic effect. So overall, probably don't waste your money on caffeinated cosmetics. Maybe something like sunscreen and maybe something like shampoo might be beneficial, but there's not a lot there.